Every night for 40 years, the lighthouse keeper's log recorded the exact same entry. All quiet, no ships in distress. Even the night there were 3 ships sinking within sight of his window. Eli Marsh took the lighthouse job in 1962, 23 years old, freshly discharged from the Navy, looking for the kind of quiet that a small rock island 11 miles off the Maine coast could offer a man who'd seen more than he wanted to talk about. The job was simple enough on paper. Keep the light burning, log the weather, report anything unusual to the mainland by radio twice a day. For the first 2 years, his logs read like anyone's: wind speeds, visibility, the occasional passing freighter noted by name and heading. Ordinary work, done well, by a man who seemed to genuinely prefer his own company to anyone else's. It was October of 1964 when the entries changed, though nobody noticed for a long time, because the change was so small it barely registered as a change at all. That was the night of the Cormorant Gale, one of the worst storms to hit that stretch of coast in a generation. 30-foot swells, winds clocked past 90 miles an hour, 3 fishing vessels caught out past the safe radius when it hit without warning. Records from the Coast Guard station on the mainland show frantic radio traffic that night, distress calls crackling through interference, at least 1 confirmed sinking with 2 fatalities. Eli's log for that night reads, in his same careful handwriting, storm passed through around 2200. Heavy wind, some rain, all quiet by morning, nothing else. No mention of distress calls. No mention of the sinking that happened less than 4 miles from his own window, close enough that survivors later said they'd seen the lighthouse beam sweeping over them in the water, close enough that it should have been the first thing logged. The Coast Guard investigated, of course. A fisherman's widow filed a formal complaint, demanding to know why the lighthouse hadn't reported what should have been visible from the tower. Eli was questioned extensively. His answer, recorded in the official file, was strange enough that it got buried rather than pursued. I didn't see anything that night, he told the investigator. The light was on, I checked it every hour same as always, but I didn't see any ships. I didn't hear any distress calls on the radio either, though I understand now there were some. The investigator's notes describe Eli as calm, cooperative, and utterly unconvincing, though nobody could quite articulate why. He wasn't lying, exactly. He seemed to genuinely believe what he was saying. He simply hadn't seen what the entire mainland Coast Guard had documented happening within view of his own tower. The case was quietly closed. Equipment malfunction, they decided, though nobody could find anything wrong with the light or the radio afterward. It happened again in 1971. And again in 1979. And again in 1988, always during the worst storms, always ships going down within sight of the tower, and always the same log entry from Eli, all quiet. No ships in distress. 4 incidents over 26 years, 4 investigations, 4 times the case was closed without explanation, because there was never any evidence Eli had done anything except genuinely, calmly, not see what should have been impossible to miss. By the time Eli retired in 2002, at 63 years old, the story had become a strange local legend up and down the coast. Fishermen who half joked about Marsh's blind spot. Coast Guard officers who quietly steered new keepers away from asking him about it directly, a persistent, unprovable whisper that something about that particular stretch of water simply didn't want to be seen by the man watching over it. Eli never spoke about it publicly. Not once in 40 years did he offer an explanation beyond the one he'd given that first investigator. He didn't see it, he didn't know why, and he'd learned not to ask. It was his granddaughter, Raina, a marine archivist working on a documentary about lighthouse history along the eastern seaboard, who finally got him to talk, 3 years after his retirement, sitting across from him at his small kitchen table on the mainland, tape recorder between them. "Grandpa," she said carefully, having read through the old Coast Guard files for weeks, piecing together dates and incidents he'd never once discussed at family dinners. "I need to ask you about the storms, the ones where you didn't log anything." Eli was quiet for a long time, looking out the window at the grey water in the distance, the same water he'd watched for 40 years from a much better vantage point. "You'll think I'm a crazy old man," he said finally. "I already think you're a crazy old man," Raina said gently. "Tell me anyway." He almost smiled at that. Then his expression settled into something more serious, more tired. "My older brother Daniel was a fisherman, Died out on that water in 1958, 4 years before I took the Lighthouse job. Storm caught his boat, same kind of storm, same stretch of coast. Nobody found him for 3 days. Eli's hands, folded on the table, tightened slightly. I took that job because I thought if I watched that water closely enough, forever, maybe I could stop it from happening to anyone else. Maybe I could make up for not being able to save him. But the ships that went down, I know, Eli said quietly. I know people died on nights I said were quiet. I've had 40 years to live with that, and I still don't have a good explanation, not one that makes any rational sense. All I know is that on those specific nights, the worst nights, I'd find myself standing at that window unable to see anything past the glass except my own reflection, no matter how hard I tried. Like my eyes just refused. Like some part of me that never stopped grieving Daniel simply couldn't let me watch it happen again, even if that meant not seeing it happen to someone else instead. Raina sat with that for a long moment, recorder still running, the weight of it settling somewhere she hadn't expected. That doesn't make it okay, she said finally, gently. No, Eli agreed. It doesn't. I've carried that. Every name from every one of those nights, I know them. I looked them up years later after each incident when I could finally make myself do it. I know who died on the nights I couldn't see. I've said their names to myself more times than I can count, out on that water, standing in the exact spot where I failed to see them. He reached into a drawer beside him and pulled out a small, worn notebook, separate from any official log, and slid it across the table to Raina. Inside, in the same careful handwriting from his Coast Guard files, was a different kind of record entirely, names, dates, a few sparse details about each person lost on the nights his official logs claimed were quiet. 12 names in total, kept privately for over 40 years, a shadow record running parallel to the official one, the truth he couldn't officially log, but also couldn't let himself forget. I'm not asking you to understand it, Eli said, watching her read. I've never understood it myself. I'm just asking you to know that I never once believed my own log entries, not for a single night. I just couldn't find a way to write down something I genuinely couldn't make myself see. Raina's documentary, released 2 years later, never fully explained what happened during those 4 storms. No clean answer, no tidy resolution. Nothing that satisfied the mystery the way documentaries usually promise to. It simply ended with Eli's private notebook. 12 names read aloud over a shot of the lighthouse, dark and decommissioned now, standing empty against a grey sky. The final line of the film, spoken by Eli himself, recorded just 8 months before he passed, was the closest thing to an explanation he ever gave anyone. Some things we watch for our whole lives, he said, and still can't bring ourselves to see, even when seeing them is exactly the job we signed up to do. I don't know if that makes me a coward or just a man who loved his brother more than his eyes were ever willing to admit.